Officer, get on the ground. Now, last warning.
Officer, I've been shot at by men with more conviction than you.
Don't test me. Hands where I can see them.
Look at me, I'm calm. You're shaking.
You are this close to being arrested.
Then understand this. The moment those cuffs click, your career is over.
Officer, I have been shot at by men with far more conviction than you. I have stared down enemies of this nation in deserts and jungles. You are making a mistake that you do not have the rank, the tenure, or the pension to survive. Look at me. I am calm. You are shaking. The neighborhood of Oak Creek, usually a sanctuary of manicured lawns, and mid-afternoon silence, was witnessing a scene that would soon tear the local police department apart. In the driveway of a pristine two-story brick colonial house, a young police officer named Kyle Miller was screaming, his hand hovering over his holster, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the mild 72-degree weather. He was 26 years old, with 2 years on the force and a chip on his shoulder the size of a billboard. Standing opposite him, next to a bucket of soapy water and a gleaming 1970 Chevrolet C10 pickup truck, was Command Sergeant Major retired Marcus Thorne. Thorne was 55 years old, built like a slab of granite with the posture of a man who had spent 30 years wearing a uniform. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't moving. He was standing perfectly still, feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped behind the small of his back in the military position of parade rest. He wore a simple gray t-shirt tucked into immaculate jeans with a leather belt. He looked like a statue of dignity. Officer Miller looked like a panic attack with a badge. "I said get down," Miller shouted again, his voice cracking. The body camera on his chest was blinking red, capturing every pixel of his unraveling composure. "I am on my own property," Thorne said, his voice deep resonant and projecting with the effortless volume of a man who had commanded thousands of troops on parade decks. "I have committed no crime. I am not a threat. And I will not degrade myself by lying in the dirt of the driveway I paid for because you lack the training to de-escalate a conversation. If you are going to arrest me, officer, then arrest me. But understand that the moment those cuffs click, your career is effectively over." Before we get into the details of how this disastrous interaction began, I need you to do something for me. Pause for a second and hit the like button if you believe that respect is earned, not given just because someone wears a badge. And if you think veterans deserve better than this, drop a comment below saying, "Respect the vet." This story is about to expose a level of incompetence that will make your blood boil, and you need to see exactly how it plays out. The standoff had been going on for less than 3 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Officer Miller had arrived at the scene with preconceived notions and an adrenaline spike he couldn't control. He saw a large black man. He saw a nice house. He saw what he interpreted as defiance. What he didn't see, what he couldn't see, because his bias blinded him, was that he was barking orders at a man who had trained thousands of officers, soldiers, and leaders. Marcus Thorne wasn't resisting arrest. He was conducting a master class in discipline, and Officer Miller was failing the test. Last warning. Miller stepped closer, invading Thorne's personal space. "You are under arrest for disorderly conduct and failure to obey a lawful order." "There is nothing lawful about your order," Thorne replied, his eyes locked on Miller's. "And the only thing disorderly here is your uniform. Your nameplate is Crooked Officer. Fix it." To understand the gravity of the mistake Officer Miller was making, you have to understand who Marcus Thorne was. Marcus wasn't just a retired soldier. He was an institution. He had enlisted in the United States Army at 18, leaving a rough neighborhood in Detroit with nothing but a duffel bag and a desire to be part of something bigger. He retired 30 years later as a Command Sergeant Major, the highest enlisted rank a soldier can achieve. He had served in the Gulf War, 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. He held the Silver Star for gallantry in action. But more importantly, he had spent 12 years as a drill instructor and later a drill sergeant school commandant. Marcus Thorne knew regulations. He knew the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and he knew the United States Constitution better than most lawyers. He had spent his life defending it. Since retiring, he had lived a quiet life in Oak Creek. He was the neighbor who lent you his snowblower without asking. He was the guy who organized the neighborhood watch but focused it on community safety, not snooping. He valued order, respect, and peace. That Saturday started like any other. It was a beautiful, sun-drenched afternoon. Marcus had spent the morning working in his garden and the early afternoon detailing his pride and joy, a restored 1970 Chevy C10. He treated the truck with the same care he used to treat his rifle. He was washing the rims, listening to the Temptations on a small portable speaker sitting on the porch. The volume was moderate classic Motown, smooth and soulful. It was just my imagination, playing at a level that wouldn't even drown out the birds chirping. Marcus was happy. He was humming along, wiping down the chrome, enjoying the fruits of his 30 years of labor. He had fought for this piece. He had bled for this driveway. Then the patrol car rolled up. It didn't pull up slowly. It screeched to a halt, blocking the end of his driveway. Officer Kyle Miller exited the vehicle with a slam of the door. There was no "good afternoon." There was no, "Sir, could I speak with you for a moment?" Miller stormed up the driveway, his hand already resting on his utility belt, his sunglasses hiding his eyes but not his aggression. "Turn that music down," Miller barked from 30 feet away. Marcus paused. He placed his sponge back in the bucket. He didn't reach for the speaker. He simply stood up, wiped his hands on a rag, and turned to face the officer. The music was still playing softly in the background. "Excuse me," Marcus asked calmly. "You heard me. The music. Kill it. We got a noise complaint." Marcus looked around. The street was empty. His nearest neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was gardening 3 houses down and waved at him. The music was barely audible from the sidewalk. Marcus knew immediately what this was. There was a new neighbor, a man named Henderson, who had moved in 2 doors down a month ago. Henderson had been seen scowling at Marcus before. This wasn't a noise complaint. This was a "I don't like who is living in this house" complaint. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice steady, "the music is well within the municipal decibel limits for daytime hours. It's 2:00 p.m. on a Saturday. You can barely hear it from the street." "I don't need a debate," Miller snapped, walking onto the property. "I need compliance. Turn it off, or I'll write you a ticket for disturbing the peace." "I am not disturbing the peace," Marcus said, standing his ground. "I am washing my vehicle. If you have a decibel meter, I invite you to use it. If not, I suggest you return to your vehicle and patrol an area where actual crimes are being committed." That was the moment Officer Miller decided he wasn't going to leave. His ego had been bruised. A black man in a t-shirt was telling him what to do, and Miller, fresh out of the academy and drunk on his own limited authority, couldn't handle it. "I need to see some ID," Miller demanded. "Now." "For what crime?" Marcus asked. "I am not operating a vehicle. I am on private property. Florida versus JL and Hebel versus 6th Judicial District Court establish that you cannot demand identification without reasonable suspicion of a crime. Washing a truck is not a crime. Listening to the Temptations is not a crime." "I'm investigating a noise ordinance violation," Miller shouted. "An anonymous complaint is not reasonable suspicion without corroborating evidence," Marcus recited, almost bored. "You have no evidence. You have an attitude." The confrontation was beginning to draw attention. While the street had been quiet moments before the sound of Officer Miller's raised voice was cutting through the suburban calm far more effectively than Marcus's music ever could. A couple walking their dog stopped on the sidewalk across the street. Mrs. Gable, the elderly neighbor 3 houses down, stopped her gardening and shaded her eyes to watch. Officer Miller felt the eyes on him. He felt the pressure. In his mind, backing down now would look like weakness. He had been trained poorly, perhaps, or maybe he had just absorbed the wrong lessons that command presence meant never admitting you were wrong. He thought control meant domination. "I'm not going to play lawyer with you," Miller spat, stepping within arm's reach of Marcus. You are refusing a direct order from a law enforcement officer. That is obstruction. It is not obstruction to assert constitutional rights, Marcus said. And let's be clear, son. You are not giving orders. You are making requests that I am declining. There is a difference. In the Army, an order must be lawful. If a general tells a private to shoot a civilian, the private has a duty to disobey. You are telling me to surrender my rights because you are irritated. That is an unlawful order. Don't call me son, Miller snarled. I am an officer of the law. Then act like one, Marcus replied, his voice dropping an octave, entering that terrifying register known to every recruit who has ever stepped off a bus at boot camp. It was the command voice. It wasn't a shout. It was a vibration that rattled the bones. You are undisciplined. Your stance is weak. You are escalating a non-event because you lack the emotional maturity to handle a conversation with a man who isn't afraid of you. You are a disgrace to that uniform. Miller flinched. He actually stepped back, his hand twitching toward his taser. You're being belligerent. I am speaking the truth. If that feels like belligerence to you, that is your insecurity talking. I need your name and date of birth right now. No. If you don't provide it, I'm taking you in. Then you better have your supervisor on speed dial, Marcus said, because I am going to sue this city for everything it has. I am going to have your badge on my mantelpiece, and I am going to make sure that every time you apply for a job for the rest of your life, the first thing that comes up on Google is the video of you violating the civil rights of a decorated combat veteran. Miller looked around wildly. What video? Marcus nodded slightly to the left. The one my neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, is recording. Miller whipped his head around. Sure enough, in the driveway next door, a woman in her late 40s was standing by her porch phone held high, recording everything. She wasn't hiding it. Officer, Mrs. Higgins called out. She was a librarian, a woman who usually avoided conflict, but she had known Marcus for 10 years. I have you on video. He hasn't done anything. The music wasn't loud. Stay back, ma'am. Do not interfere. Miller shouted at her, pointing a finger. She is on her property, Marcus said. Focus on me. You are losing control of the situation. Take a breath. Walk away. It's the only smart move you have left. But Miller couldn't walk away. He was too deep in the hole. Turn around, he told Marcus. You are under arrest. For what? Disorderly conduct, resisting without violence, failure to identify. Take your pick. Those are not crimes, Marcus said. Those are cover charges for a bruised ego. Turn around. Miller reached for his handcuffs. This is the moment where things usually go wrong. This is where instinct kicks in, where the fight-or-flight response takes over. But Marcus Thorne had mastered his instincts decades ago. He knew that if he pulled away, if he brushed the officer's hand aside, if he did anything physical, the narrative would change. The headline would become, Suspect Struggles with Police. He wouldn't give them that. Marcus slowly, deliberately turned his back to the officer. He brought his hands together behind him. I am complying, Marcus stated loudly for the camera. I am allowing you to handcuff me. I am not resisting. But mark my words, Officer Miller. You have just made the decision that will define the rest of your life. And it is going to be a very hard life. The metal cuffs clicked shut around Marcus's wrists. They were tight, too tight, but Marcus didn't flinch. He stood tall, his back straight, his chin up. He didn't look like a prisoner. He looked like a general inspecting the troops, even in handcuffs. Spread your legs, Miller shouted, patting Marcus down roughly. He reached into Marcus's pockets, pulling out a slim leather wallet, a set of keys, and a handkerchief. He tossed them onto the hood of the pristine Chevy truck. Careful with the paint, Marcus said. It was the only time his voice showed a hint of annoyance. Quiet. Miller shoved Marcus toward the patrol car. Get in. Marcus maneuvered himself into the back of the cruiser. It was a tight squeeze for a man of his size. The hard plastic seat was uncomfortable, and the air inside was stale. As the door slammed shut, trapping him inside, Marcus looked out the window. He saw Mrs. Higgins still recording. He saw Mrs. Gable shaking her head in disbelief. He saw the neighborhood he loved being turned into a crime scene for no reason. Miller got into the driver's seat. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon. He sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He picked up the radio. "Dispatch 1 Alpha 24, 1 in custody." "Copy 1 Alpha 24. Charge, disorderly, obstruction, failure to ID." There was a pause on the radio. Even the dispatcher seemed to sense the flimsiness of the list. "Copy. Transporting to precinct." "Affirmative." Miller put the car in drive and pulled away. He didn't look at Marcus in the rearview mirror. He turned up the police radio, trying to drown out the silence in the car. But the silence was heavy. It was the silence of doom. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller began, reciting the Miranda warning, rushing through it. "I know my rights," Marcus interrupted from the back seat. "I fought for them, for date. Did you serve, Officer Miller?" Miller didn't answer. "I didn't think so," Marcus continued. "Because if you had, you would know about the rules of engagement. You would know about escalation of force. You treat citizens of your own country worse than we were allowed to treat insurgents in a war zone. Think about that." "I said remain silent," Miller yelled. "I am choosing to waive my right to silence for the moment," Marcus said calmly, "because I want to educate you. You see, when we get to the station, you are going to process me. You are going to look at my ID, and you are going to realize who I am. And then you are going to feel a pit in your stomach. That pit is fear, and it should be." The ride to the precinct took 15 minutes. They were the longest 15 minutes of Kyle Miller's life, though he didn't fully realize it yet. He drove aggressively, speeding through yellow lights, desperate to get this perpetrator into a cell so he could write his report and justify his actions. He was already composing the narrative in his head. Subject was hostile. Subject assumed a fighting stance. Subject refused lawful orders. He would paint Marcus as a threat. But he had forgotten the video. He had forgotten the witnesses. And he had no idea what was in the wallet he had tossed onto the passenger seat. They arrived at the precinct, a brick building that had seen better days. Miller parked in the sally port and hauled Marcus out of the car. He marched him through the heavy steel doors into the processing area. "What do we got?" asked the desk sergeant, a man named Kowalski. "Disorderly. Refused to ID, real attitude problem," Miller said, pushing Marcus toward the bench. "Sit." Marcus sat. He looked at Sergeant Kowalski. Kowalski was older, maybe 50. He had a high and tight haircut that was graying at the temples. He had a Marine Corps lapel pin on his civilian jacket, hanging on the coat rack behind him. Marcus locked eyes with Kowalski. "Semper Fi, Sergeant," Marcus said. Kowalski looked up from his computer, surprised. He looked at Marcus, really looked at him. He saw the bearing. He saw the discipline. He saw the haircut. "Ura," Kowalski replied automatically. Then he frowned. "Miller, uncuff this man while we process him. He's not going anywhere." "He's combative, Sarge," Miller lied. "I am not combative," Marcus said. "I am detained unlawfully. And Sergeant, I believe if you check the wallet Officer Miller seized, you will find my identification. I am Command Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne, United States Army, retired." The room went dead silent. Sergeant Kowalski froze. His hands hovered over the keyboard. He slowly turned his head to look at Officer Miller, who was struggling to unclip the keys to the handcuffs from his belt. "Did he just say, Command Sergeant Major?" Kowalski asked, his voice dangerously low. "I don't know, he's been running his mouth the whole time." Miller scoffed. Kowalski stood up. He walked around the high desk. He didn't look at Miller. He walked over to the counter where Miller had dumped Marcus's personal effects. He picked up the leather wallet. He opened it. The first thing he saw was the standard driver's license. Marcus Thorne. Clean record. Veteran designation on the license. But behind that was the blue Department of Defense retiree ID card. And tucked behind that was a small laminated card, a courtesy card, often given to high-ranking retirees listing their service highlights. Kowalski read it. Rank CSME 9. Service 30 years. Awards: Silver Star, Bronze Star, with V Legion of Merit, Purple Heart. Kowalski's face lost all color. He looked at Marcus, who was sitting calmly with his hands still cuffed behind his back. Then he looked at Officer Miller with an expression that could have melted steel. "Miller," Kowalski whispered, "take those cuffs off, now. Sarge, I haven't finished the pat-down." "Take them off." Kowalski roared, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. Every officer in the booking room stopped what they were doing. "You just arrested a command sergeant major with a Silver Star for a noise complaint." Miller fumbled with the key, his hands shaking. He wouldn't show ID. He was standing in a threatening manner." "I was at parade rest," Marcus corrected. "As I am sure the sergeant recognizes." The cuffs clicked open. Marcus brought his arms forward. He rubbed his wrists where the metal had dug in. He stood up and adjusted his shirt. He looked at Kowalski. "Thank you, Sergeant." "Sergeant Major," Kowalski said, snapping to attention. It was instinctive. You don't spend time in the Corps without learning to respect an E9. "I apologize. I don't know what happened here, but—" "I'll tell you what happened," Marcus said, his voice filling the room. "This officer came onto my property based on a frivolous anonymous call. He escalated immediately. He refused to articulate reasonable suspicion. He arrested me because I hurt his feelings. And now I am going to make a phone call." The door to the inner office opened and the watch commander, Lieutenant Bates, stepped out. "What is all the yelling out here, Kowalski?" "Lieutenant," Kowalski said, holding up Marcus's ID like it was a holy relic. "Officer Miller just brought in Command Sergeant Major Thorne, arrested him in his driveway. Noise complaint." Lieutenant Bates was a politician in uniform. He knew a PR nightmare when he saw one. He looked at Marcus, a large, respectable, highly decorated black veteran. He looked at Miller, a young, flustered white officer. He looked at the charge sheet Miller had started. Disorderly conduct. "Oh no," Bates muttered. He walked quickly over to Marcus. "Sir, I'm Lieutenant Bates. Please come into my office. Let's sit down and talk about this. Can I get you some water? Coffee?" "I don't want your coffee, Lieutenant," Marcus said coldly. "And I don't want to talk in your office. I want my property returned. I want to be processed out, so I have the paperwork proving I was arrested. I want the body camera footage preserved, and then I am going to leave." "Sir, we can drop the charges right now," Bates said, sweating. "It was a misunderstanding. Officer Miller is young. He made a judgment call." "It wasn't a judgment call," Marcus said. "It was a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights. It was racial profiling, and it was an abuse of power. If I were a 19-year-old kid with no knowledge of the law, I'd be sitting in a cell right now with a record that would ruin my future. I am not letting this slide." "Sir, please," Bates pleaded. "We can handle this internally. We'll discipline him." "You will discipline him," Marcus agreed. "But only after the federal judge orders you to. Am I free to go, or am I being held?" Bates looked at Miller, who was shrinking into the corner. "You are free to go, sir. Immediately. There are no charges. We are voiding the arrest." "No," Marcus said. "You don't void it. You record it. I want the booking sheet. I want the record that this happened. Because if you void it, you'll try to say it never happened. I want the paper." This was the checkmate. Marcus knew the system. If they wiped the record, he couldn't sue for false arrest as easily. He needed the paper trail. Bates hesitated. He knew exactly what Marcus was doing, but he had no choice. Marcus was standing there, unmovable. "Print it," Bates told Kowalski. "Release on recognizance. Charges dropped, insufficient evidence." Kowalski printed the sheet. He handed it to Marcus with a look of profound respect and apology. "Sir, again, I'm sorry." Marcus took the paper. He looked at Kowalski. "You're a good Marine sergeant. Keep your people in line." Then Marcus turned to Miller. The young officer couldn't meet his eyes. "You have a lot to learn, son," Marcus said. "I hope you saved your money. You're going to need it." Marcus walked out of the police station 45 minutes after he had arrived. He didn't call an Uber. He called his wife Sarah, who had been at the grocery store when the arrest happened. She arrived in their sedan, tears streaming down her face, terrified. When she saw him standing there calm and unharmed, she rushed to hug him. "I'm okay, baby," he soothed her. "I'm okay, but we have work to do." They drove home. When they pulled into the driveway, the bucket was still there. The sponge was on the ground where it had fallen, but the scene had changed. Mrs. Higgins was waiting on her porch. Mrs. Gable was there too. "Marcus," Mrs. Higgins ran over. "I got it all. I sent it to your email. I didn't know what else to do." "You did exactly the right thing, Joyce," Marcus said. "Thank you." That evening, Marcus sat in his study. He watched the video. It was damning. It showed everything: his calm demeanor, Miller's aggression, the lack of any reasonable noise, the lawful assertion of rights. It showed a man washing his truck being treated like a dangerous criminal. He forwarded the video to his nephew, a civil rights attorney in Chicago. Then he wrote a short, factual statement. He didn't post it to Facebook. He didn't put it on Twitter. He sent it to the local investigative reporter for Channel 5 News, a woman known for exposing city corruption. By Sunday morning, the story was live. But it wasn't just a local story. The internet works fast. Someone uploaded the video to Reddit. Then it hit TikTok. Then Twitter. The headline was irresistible. "Drill instructor arrested for washing truck while black." By Sunday afternoon, the video had 4 million views. The comments were a landslide of outrage. Veterans groups were sharing it. Active duty soldiers were sharing it. The hashtag #StandWithCSM started trending. The comment section was brutal for the Oak Creek Police Department. "That man has more discipline in his pinky finger than that cop has in his whole body." Parade rest. He stood at parade rest, and the cop was still scared. This is what happens when you give a badge to a bully. On Monday morning, Marcus Thorne put on his suit. He pinned a small lapel pin of the U.S. Army onto his jacket. He walked into the federal courthouse downtown with his lawyer and filed a civil rights lawsuit pursuant to 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, alleging false arrest, excessive force, and violation of the 4th and 14th Amendments. At the same time, the Oak Creek Police Department was under siege. Their phone lines were jammed. Their email server crashed. Protesters were gathering outside the station. Peaceful, disciplined protesters, many of them veterans wearing their old service hats. They weren't chanting, "Defund the police." They were chanting, "Honor the oath." Officer Kyle Miller was placed on administrative leave, but the public wasn't satisfied. They wanted his badge. The chief of police, a man who had been hoping to retire quietly in a year, called a press conference. He looked tired. He tried to spin it. "We are investigating the context," he began, but the reporters weren't having it. "Chief," shouted a reporter from the back, "the video shows the sergeant major standing still. What context justifies arresting a man on his own property for a noise complaint that didn't exist?" The chief had no answer. The legal battle that followed was swift and brutal. Marcus Thorne didn't just want money, he wanted change. His lawsuit demanded not just damages, but a revision of the department's training policies regarding interaction with citizens on private property. The discovery phase was a disaster for the city. It turned out Officer Miller had a history. 3 previous complaints for discourtesy, One for excessive force that had been swept under the rug. His personnel file was a red flag that the department had ignored because they were short-staffed. Furthermore, the anonymous noise complaint was traced. It had come from the new neighbor, Henderson. When the police interviewed Henderson, he admitted he hadn't even heard the music inside his house. He just didn't think that kind of music belonged in this neighborhood. The racism was naked. Officer Miller had become the unwitting but willing enforcer of a neighbor's bigotry. 6 months after the incident, the Department of Justice announced they were opening a pattern or practice investigation into the Oak Creek PD. They wanted to know if the harassment of minority residents was systemic. The city attorney looked at the evidence. He looked at Marcus Thorne, who sat in every deposition like a stone statue answering questions with military precision, never getting angry, never slipping up. He looked at the jury polls, which showed that 98% of the potential jury pool sided with the veteran. "We have to settle," the city attorney told the mayor. "If this goes to trial, he won't just win. He will dismantle us. The jury will give him millions just to teach us a lesson." The settlement offer came in, $850,000. It was a massive sum for a small city. Marcus accepted the offer, but with conditions. Officer Miller had to be terminated, not allowed to resign, but terminated for cause, so he couldn't just move to the next town and be a cop there. And the department had to implement a mandatory de-escalation training program run by an independent board. The city agreed. On the day the settlement was signed, Marcus stood on the steps of City Hall. The cameras were there. The microphones were thrust in his face. "Mr. Thorne, you've won nearly $1 million. What are you going to do with it?" a reporter asked. Marcus looked at the camera. "I am establishing a legal defense fund for veterans who have been mistreated by law enforcement, because not everyone is a sergeant major. Not everyone knows the law, and not everyone has a neighbor like Mrs. Higgins to record the truth. I was lucky. I am using this money to make sure others don't have to be lucky." Officer Kyle Miller was fired the next day. His union tried to fight it, but the public pressure was too great. The video was too clear. He was stripped of his certification. Last anyone heard, he was working at a warehouse in another state, telling anyone who would listen that he got a raw deal. Marcus Thorne returned to his quiet life in Oak Creek. He still washes his truck on Saturdays. He still listens to the Temptations. But things are different now. When police cars drive by, they slow down. The officers wave. It's a wave of respect, but also of caution. They know that in this neighborhood, the citizens know their rights. The neighbor Henderson moved out 3 months later. The social pressure was too much. He couldn't handle the glares from the other neighbors who had rallied around Marcus. The Oak Creek Police Department is different too. The new training is rigorous. Sergeant Kowalski was promoted to lieutenant and put in charge of the training academy. He invites Marcus to come speak to every new class of recruits. Marcus teaches them about the Constitution. He teaches them about community. But mostly he teaches them about respect. Authority is not a club you use to beat people into submission, Marcus tells the recruits. It is a trust. You borrow it from the citizens, and if you abuse it, they have the right and the duty to take it back. As we close this story, I want you to sit with that image for a moment. A man who spent 30 years defending his country, standing in his own driveway, handcuffed by the very system he swore to protect. It's a hard image to swallow, but it's an important one. Marcus Thorne won his battle because he was prepared. He had the rank, the knowledge, and the discipline. But what about the young man who isn't a veteran? What about the single mother who is tired from a double shift? What happens to them when an Officer Miller shows up? That is the question we need to keep asking. Justice shouldn't depend on your rank. It shouldn't depend on how well you can stand at parade rest while someone screams in your face. It should be the standard, not the exception. Marcus Thorne didn't just win a lawsuit. He reminded us of a fundamental truth. Dignity is not negotiable. Thank you for listening to this story. It's a heavy one, but these are the stories that remind us why we need to stay vigilant. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the nature of authority and respect, please share it. Send it to a veteran you know. Send it to a friend. And before you go, I have a question for you. Do you think Officer Miller would have acted differently if the cameras weren't rolling, or was his bias so deep that even being recorded couldn't stop him? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Stay safe, know your rights, and look out for your neighbors. Until next time.